Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina, and you're watching what is the first episode of our new season. Our guest today is cartoonist and professor Tom Lyle. Tom, welcome to Comic Culture.
Hi, Terrence. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, last year we spoke and we talked a little bit about your career and a little bit about what you're doing at SCAD, but we also sort of brushed the surface on a topic that's really kind of interesting to me, and that's storytelling. And I was hoping today we could continue that discussion and talk a little bit about storytelling. And I was hoping that for our new audiences watching today, if you could just give us a brief description or a definition of what storytelling is in comics.
Oh my God. Storytelling, if you do it correctly, is when you put the elements together and cinematically make your audience follow across a page the way you want them to. And there's sometimes people are not successful at that, but you're trying to convey the story almost like a movie. And there are different techniques to doing that, and that's the fun part about it. There's no one answer about how to do storytelling.
Now, in television and film, there's sort of an unspoken language where if we see someone in a wide shot, and that character is on the left of the screen and another character is on the right of the screen, when we see them in a close-up, those two characters should both be where they were, sort of looking, on screen left looking screen right, and on screen right looking screen left. Is that sort of what an artist is thinking about when they're putting this together on a page?
I've had discussions with other artists that have disagreed with me, but yes, I follow the cinematic rules of that. And in fact, there are certain people that believe in terms of storytelling that because your eye flows from left to right, that every action on the page and every panel should flow left to right. And I'm like, but if you got two different groups trying to meet, sometimes one has to go this way and one has to go this way. So they can't always go, that way. And it's, so I believe you can break rules, but knowing them is best.
Right. It is interesting because if you don't understand the rules, when you break them, you're not doing it.
You're right, my folks.
you're not doing it for the right reason. You're just kind of slipping and falling. Whereas if you kind of know the rules, you can always skirt around them for an effect or an impact. And I was reading an article about the I guess it would be the Z flow of a page, where, like you were saying, the panels go from left to right and then from column to column. And is that something that when you were laying out a page that you're going to be conscious of, that, I've got to make sure that that last panel is going to automatically draw the eye to the next column, or are you just thinking, well, the reader will sort of understand this and will follow it?
If I've done my job, they will follow it no matter what. But if I've done my job correctly, they will follow it. So I don't think in terms of I've got to make their eye flow this way, but I do think this is the side this character is on, this is the side this character is on. I'm going to make it work, but I also have to push the parameters of the depth of field like that too, to help with the dynamics of comics. But I had a big discussion with the comic artist recently who was like fighting me and telling me I was wrong. But that's the cool thing about doing storytelling, is there's not one answer to how it works. But I do follow the cinematic rules pretty exclusively, at least.
Now
but technically, by the way, I'm sorry to add one more thing. In cinema, if your character is moving from left to right, their struggle is supposed to be easy. And if they move from right to left, it's supposed to indicate their struggle is a little more difficult. And so I do try and use those rules a little bit. And I also use direction changes for time lapses.
Now, it seems like there's a psychology in storytelling, the same way in film they're going to use light, shadow, certain colors, and even sound to make an audience feel a certain way. And I think we can all remember the theme song from Jaws as that indication that something bad's about to happen.
Yeah.
So in comics, you mentioned depth of field. You mentioned creating, I guess, that sense of three-dimensionality on the flat page. So how are you kind of working that psychological angle into your storytelling?
It's interesting. You have to start, and most writers don't. God, I'm sorry. It's not going to work usually unless you write your own material, because most writers don't take this into account. But you need subtextual elements. So, like, I talk in my class about a movie. I used to love James Cameron. I hated Avatar, though. So, but in The Abyss, the two main characters, Ed Harris and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, are estranged wedded couple but there are circular visual elements all through that movie that are rings, giving you a marriage type thing, showing them, and he's even saved by his wedding ring at one thing. So that's a subtextual element you try and look for. There's a really cool book called Cinematic Storytelling that talks about that a lot and has a lot of really neat subtextual elements in it. But hopefully you can get that in there, and that really helps your story have more depth to it. As a quick example, one of my students one quarter was doing this 4-page story of a girl who'd been sexually abused by her dad, and she was going back to the house, and the father's dead now, and it's her and her boyfriend looking around the place and seeing all these things, and then at the end she burns the house down. And I make them draw the same story 4 different times during a quarter to make them dig deep for panel things. And in the last version, she started having crows land in the trees. And it was so cool as a subtextual element, the darkness of the crows. And then when the house caught on fire, all the crows fly away. That's the kind of stuff that adds to a story so effectively in comics.
So I mean, it's fascinating to talk about because, again, the casual reader is just going to look at the page and read the balloons and then look at the drawing. Maybe not even read the balloons all the way, just kind of thumb through it.
Yes.
So it makes it difficult because, in a sense, when we're watching a film, there's 100 people working on that one shot. But you're solely responsible as the artist for everything that we're seeing and I guess how we're feeling. You work with a script in some ways, but you're interpreting it, and as you interpret it, that's what the audience is feeling. So have you ever changed the tone of a story when you're putting it together where it might seem lighter and you just feel that this is a darker moment and maybe it needs something, or maybe you think that it shouldn't be dark at this beat, but it should be dark later on?
I don't have a good example of that, but yes, I have. I don't do it very often, though, because I think it's my responsibility to make the writer's ideas work. But I will tell you that I much preferred working the way I worked on Spider-Man, which is the Stan Lee plot format, where the writer just writes a plot, you draw it, and then the script is written after that. The dialogue and narration is written after you draw it. Whereas when I was working on Robin with Chuck Dixon, Chuck worked full script, so I already had a full script. But Chuck's so visual, I trusted him, and so he occasionally did almost all writers do an occasional panel where there's 2 actions described, and you go, which one do I do? In my classes, I talk about, here's the classic example. Robin enters the room and opens the window. Well, is he entering the room or is he opening the window? And I said, what's the solution to my students? And I go, you show him from outside the building at the window, opening the window, but you show the open door behind him. And they go, oh yeah. So you have to interpret what their intentions are sometimes.
That's interesting.
Tone I don't change very often.
Now, you mentioned the Marvel method where basically, from what I understand, in the old days, Stan would spend a couple of minutes talking to Jack Kirby, let's say. Okay, how about the Fantastic Four fights God? Go. And then Kirby comes back in a month.
The Silver Surfer come out of that, yes. I mean, Jack Kirby used to get descriptions that would fit a paragraph, and he'd draw 22 pages based on that. Whereas when I was working plot form, I was working from a 12 to 14-page plot, so it described pretty much everything, and occasionally had some rough dialogue in there. But you have the leeway of the pacing then, which is really cool. Like when I was on Starman, my last issue on Starman, Roger Stern had allotted a certain amount of pages to this one sequence and shortchanged the fight scene. And this was my last issue, and I just called Roger and I said, can I do a montage of this scene and do it on 2 pages instead of 4 so that we can have 2 more pages for the fight? And he went, oh yeah, okay. And it worked, But I just wanted to end on a good, strong note of, and by the way, fight choreography is one of the things I love doing. I think it's great because there is a choreography to fight.
Well, I would imagine it's with fighting, it seems simple, but you have to have, you're telling a story of every fight. There's the beginning, the middle, the end. There's the ebb and the flow of the action, much like in the overall book. So what is your thought on fight choreography and creating that tension throughout the whole fight so that even though we know Robin's going to win in the end, but he might be in peril in the middle?
Well, when I'm talking fight choreography, one of the things I got to talk about is that in storytelling, I do like cinema. When a panel changes, that's essentially a cut in cinema. And I feel like you should be a different distance from the subject. So if we're here, I want to either be here or here for the next shot. And you create tension by that. And then the other thing is, you got to remember, if Robin's taking a punch with his right hand, in the next one, he better be hitting with his left hand and not just going like this repeatedly with his right hand. And so it's a ballet of sorts. And I've never stood up and walked through it, but I do think it through in my head. Okay, he's doing this, and then he does this, and then and then he kicks with his left leg because he just hit with his left arm, and that kind of stuff. And you really have to think about it, which is why Kirby was innate at it. He could do that geniusly. I mean, I learned a lot from him, and then I learned a ton about fight choreography from Frank Miller's Daredevil run and Barry Smith's Conan run. I love Barry Smith's choreography. I think he's really good at it. So I really encourage my students to look at other artists and steal techniques, but not style.
That's the toughest part.
Yeah.
To know when to stop.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about storytelling, and there are a few names that come up as sort of the tops in storytelling, or at least ones who have had some real impact in the medium of comics. And one is Neal Adams, who worked, I guess the majority of his career was at DC. And we had some pages that we pulled up, and I was hoping that you'd be able to sort of give us an idea of the difference, I guess, between a Neal Adams and a Jack Kirby. Obviously, we can see them, but just to kind of get your interpretation of them as, the
Sure.
professor of sequential art.
Oh, thanks. Sure. I'd be glad to.
So if we could take a look at the first still of Neal Adams, it's Adams 1. Okay, in this one we see Batman is, I guess, fighting someone from the League of Assassins.
Right.
What are your thoughts as we take a look at this page?
This is actually a pretty tame page for Neal. Neal usually has odd panel layouts, and for it to be so square and normal is not him. And he didn't break the border on any of the panels except number 3 there, where Batman's foot and cape break across. He is not the best storyteller usually, but on this page he's doing quite well, because the assassin's on the left, Batman's on the right, and he keeps it that way until he shows in panel 4 the guy crossing across, and then he's switched sides. So Neal made sure we switched sides before he showed Batman on the other side. Neal's art is mostly powerful because his drawing's so powerful. His storytelling is usually fairly weak. But this page is actually a good example. For a beginning artist, though, the biggest problem you would not want to do on this that he does is panels 1, 2, 3, and 5 are all medium shots. And usually you want to not have that much similarity between them. But look at the way he treats that cape and, the depth of field and everything. So he makes up for it.
And even if we take a look at the background, it's obviously we're in some sort of dojo or
Right.
gym. And, for someone like Neal, whose figures are so detailed, to have the background that's so quiet, does that have an impact on the reader?
I think it does, and plus he's using the reflection of the floor to add to the dynamics. And don't forget to look at something like in panel 4, where the background is fading to the left. The perspective is going like this, and that pulls your eye towards Batman. So he's using perspective when it needs to be. He used a flat shot in the last panel and in third panel, but the first panel fades the other way. It fades from left to right. So he's using perspective to pull your eye around some too. I do like that it's kind of not a busy background. It keeps your focus on the characters. They don't do it much now, but in the older comics, especially Miller's Daredevil, background elements can disappear during a fight scene as long as you establish them at the beginning, but they can start disappearing.
Now we have another Adams that I'd like to look at. This is the still called Adams 2. And this one, I believe, is taking place in a lab. I believe the doctor has developed some sort of serum that will eventually turn him into Man-Bat. And this one seems a lot different from the page that we were just looking at.
It's also a good example of how much dialogue they used to put into these things, because of they were usually 1 or 2 issue stories, and you had to cover a lot more territory, because that's a lot of dialogue in panel 1 and 2. Neal is really good about using photo reference, so I'm betting you $5 he went and got a photograph of the inside of a car for that panel 2. It's got really good depth of field with the character's head on the left being in the foreground. But I really, really hate that the dialogue balloons are in between the bat and the scientist, with the vial in panel 3. Panel 4 reminds me of, I think Neil was probably stealing from Eisner there. Eisner did a lot of stories where there's a faucet dripping in the foreground and you see past it. But hey, everybody steals from everybody. I love the lamp in panel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as the light is blazing out. He's really good though about, if you look at panel 5 and 6, the black of the lampshade goes into the black of either the lampshade or something in the background on panel 6. So it's pulling your eye across there, which is really neat.
So that's
actually a really tame page for him though.
I would have never thought that the lampshade is leading our eye into the other part, but I mean, the second you say it, you realize, yes, that's what it's doing. It's sort of continuing that pull, that flow of shadow and light just seems to draw your eye right there.
Well, look at panel 4 too. That black shape behind the faucet is going on a slant from left to right, pulling your eye down so that you see the next panel too. So he's using black very effectively to pull your eye around.
Now, I wanted to look at one more Neal Adams page, and this one is going to be Adams number 4 on our slides, because this is a different page. It's not so much action as it is an exchange, just a conversation, really. So as we take a look there, we see Green Arrow and Green Lantern talking to a dirty hippie.
How appropriate. I had long hair and everybody assumed I was a hippie. This is more typical of Neal's storytelling, where he's got overlaps and stuff like that going on all over the place, where panel 1, Hal Jordan's elbow comes in from panel 2 into panel 1, and then Green Arrow's leg goes into panel 3, and Hal's arm is in panel 4 going back to panel 3. He's breaking so many rules with all that, but if you look at it, there is a nice S-curve that's sort of a backwards S-curve happening on this page. So he's at least pulling your eye around correctly. One of the things he's doing here that I try to get my students not to do is on the left-hand side of the page, panels 1, 2, and 3 pretty much line up. And I really would have made panel 2 end before the edge of panel 1 and 3 so that it didn't line up, because it makes the readability more clean. And by the way, the balloon placement's not great. Panel 1's balloon, when Arrow was talking, it goes down into panel 2, which is going to make you miss Hal's balloons at the top of panel 2.
And is that something that the artist is putting there, or is that something that the letterer
Actually, that's the editors usually put where the balloons should go. But sometimes they trust you. When I was on Batman, or Robin rather, I had been placing my balloons when I worked with Chuck at Eclipse Comics, and I told them that when I was working on Robin, and they said, "Oh, go ahead and place them then." So, and they rarely changed my balloon placement, but I would place it when I was doing the art. You just do it in blue pencil instead of graphite.
Okay. Now I want to take a look at one of Marvel's artists, and this is someone who I was a big fan of. I've met him once, John Buscema. So if we could take a look at Buscema number 2 on our stills, and then Tom, if you could just take a look at that and tell us what your thoughts are. This is a simple 4-panel layout of the Silver Surfer having, I guess, an internal monologue, I guess a soliloquy.
Buscema's work on the Surfer is some of the stuff that really, really intrigued me as a kid and got me really wanting to draw comics. And his acting's so good here. That's his strength over Kirby. His acting is so much stronger. The one thing he did layout-wise that I would not advise anybody to do is panel 2 is shorter than panel 1, and you get this weird middle axis happening there where the panels don't line up. And you have to make sure your balloons pull your eye around, and Stan, God bless him, didn't make sure of that, because I would go from panel 2 to panel 4. But Stan just assumed you knew to go to panel 3. But I've seen writers and editors use the balloons to pull your eye around when you had a goofy layout like this. But God, that's a beautiful black and white placement. This
is one of those, this is a moment that when you read it, to me as a reader, like you said, this pulls you in, and just that third panel rather of the Surfer looking so miserable, and it's all in the shoulders.
Yeah,
This to me was Buscema's probably, to me, that was his high watermark in a career of so many.
I loved his work on the Surfer, and where I grew up, I didn't see any of the Surfer work until issue 8, when it became a 12-cent book instead of a 25-cent book, because Jacksonville, Florida didn't carry the quarter books back then. So I missed the early ones and had to see him later. But I love the way he makes characters act. I also like the leanness of some of his figures. I think the Surfer's awesome the way he draws him. And because when you see Kirby drawing, he's so much blockier and heavier. And then look at the way John's using the swirl from the surfboard to pull your eye around too. I mean, I think that's cool.
It's just amazing. And I don't think color improves this page.
No.
I think that you could look at this as just as is, and it can't really improve upon it too much.
The Surfer series is one of the books I encourage my students to look at the black and white versions, because John's black and white placement's pretty impeccable about this time. So, and he's doing full pencils on here too, so it's mostly him.
Now, the other one that I wanted to take a look at was Buscema 3, which is his work on Conan. Or Conan, pardon me. I always get confused now that the talk show is on the air. But this is a scene, I believe it's from Conan. And this is a completely different sort of page layout. It's a lot busier. I just wanted to get your sense on this.
John was really good with doing cinematic things, and you notice he's doing something Gil Kane did a lot as well. Is like panel 2 is a downshot, panel 3 is an upshot, and that's a way to keep your audience off balance, and also to keep the story flowing when it's not really anything big going on until panel 4, when you see the skull and bones and all that. That's kind of cool. John's really good at characters and fabric and acting. And I will say, the way Conan is sitting in that chair in panel 1, Conan doing that, and then Mephisto sitting in his throne, are two of the things Buscema drew that just have so much power. The way he just sits there and goes, "Yeah, here I am," you know. And they were huge influences on me. This is storytelling wise, there's not much background to show me where I am on this page, so it's a little problematic for me that way. But you know, there's so much dialogue. Roy Thomas has written it and made it seem, you know, okay, here I go.
Well, I see that we are running a little short on time, so I'd like to just hop around a little bit, if I could,
Okay.
With our stills. I wanted to take a look at one panel from Jack Kirby's Hunger Dogs. That would be Kirby number 5. And this is, generally Kirby's work is pretty easy to understand, but on this page, I see that DC has put in the dreaded arrow to kind of tell the reader where to go. And I'm wondering, do we need the arrow?
Yes, you do. If that's the way it was supposed to flow, yes, you do. And I regret that. And this is late Kirby, and Jack was losing a lot of his storytelling and drawing skills. He actually became a caricature of himself, partly from his health, I think, and partly just because he had worked so much. He quit looking at reference material. The most easy to read panel is the last one. I can tell what's going on. It's nice depth of field and you know, good stuff. But he's counting on the motion of the vehicle in panel 1 to carry you to 2, and then 2 to carry you to the middle, and then the way Darkseid is looking to carry you to panel 4. It's problematic, I will tell you. Very problematic.
And then I think the last still that I would like to talk about is Jim Steranko's, it's number 3, Steranko 3. And this is the page from Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., where he expected the reader to turn the comic. And I'm wondering, is this a gimmick or is this brilliance?
It's a gimmick, and when I had not seen it in years, and when I looked at it today before we did this, I went, oh yeah, I remember that, and you had to turn the book to follow it. He's using the maze as a way to make you figure it out, which is kind of cool. I'm not sure it works, but it's a good experiment. Jim's interesting because he was so visual about trying things that made you not just sit there as a passive reader. So he tried to make you an active participant in the reading, and I liked that. I mean, I thought it was cool. In many ways, I consider Jim Steranko the father of Image Comics in the sense that he was very glitzy and graphic and visual. The problem is they forgot the storytelling that he could do when they started Image Comics. And Image Comics became more about how much can I sell the pages for. No offense to all those guys, I love them, but I like this page. I really detest the coloring because it's hiding so much of the details of Jim's art here. And that yellow tone on Nick Fury on panel 3 is...
Now, is that something that, that an artist has much control over, or is this just something where a colorist might be thinking, you know what, I'm running a little short on time, so yellow and blue it is?
He was trying to have... Jim actually colored some of his own Shield stuff, so I don't know if he colored this or not. He's using the yellow to pull your eye around because the maze is colored yellow and stuff like that. That when you color a character or characters all one color, that's called a knockout. He basically did a knockout on Fury in panel 3 and 4. It's kind of neat though that he's using the yellow and the goggles of the character in panel 2. Panel 1 is just hard to read because Fury's actually lost inside of the full figure Fury's lost in the face of the other one. So it's an interesting experiment. I think overall it works pretty well.
It's almost like we're looking at a printout of a Saul Bass Hitchcock opening for like Vertigo or something.
Yeah, yeah.
But
it's MC Escher drawing.
I see that we have about 1 minute left. If a student were, someone were interested in studying at SCAD, how can they find out more about the Sequential Art program and maybe apply?
Well, admissions is easy to contact, but they can also just directly email me, and I don't mind giving out my email address, but it's TLYLE@scad.edu, and I'll be glad to get them to the right person. And all of their information about it is on the www.scad.edu site as well. You can look it up and see what the program entails. I will say I'm very proud of the sequential program. I think it's quite good. So I'm biased, but...
Well, we are out of time. We've been talking with Tom Lyle. I'd like to thank you so much, Tom, for being with us on Comic Culture today. I feel like I've learned a lot. I hope our audience has as well. I'd like to thank those of you who are at home watching. I encourage you to keep your eyes on this channel for more episodes as the semester continues. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.